Welcome to an expansive life conversation with results architect SANDE GOLGART. Our guest today is Coach Jim Johnson. Over 30 years of experience developing winning high school basketball teams, including 428 career victories, sets the stage for the unique credibility and power of Coach Jim Johnson's message. Many speakers talk about leadership, but it's rare to find a speaker who has quite literally led thousands. Your journey to realignment from fear to freedom starts now. Live an expansive life.
Wow, thank you for that intro. Welcome, everybody, to an expansive life conversation. I am your host, SANDE GOLGART, and I am thrilled today, really excited for this conversation. We're fortunate enough to have Coach Jim Johnson on the show with us. Jim, welcome to an expansive life conversation.
It's always great to see you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me as well. You know, it's so often we're on this show and we're talking about like what feels really important. It's often business or it's, making sure that we're living our best life. But oftentimes, I find some of the best, most important stories aren't happening in the boardroom. They're not happening closing a deal. They're happening like just right in front of our eyes. I remember this Rick Riley, many years, probably 30 years ago, wrote this incredible article about the meaning of life. And he said, so often, we're looking for it out there when it just passed by, wearing a bicycle helmet a few sizes too big, trying to wobble down the street on its bike. And your story, the JMac story, kind of reminds me of that. Level of, life is about so much more than the zeros in your bank account and the things that we may chase, in life. This story warms everybody's heart. I would invite everybody that is tuning in, before we roll this video, grab a box of Kleenex, take a couple of deep breaths, and really settle in and watch this unbelievable miracle as told by the ESPN crew several years ago. But Jason, you want to tee up that video for everybody?
What we all want in life is a shot. But what we do with it, that's the story we all want to tell.
I've coached for 25 years, and I've never experienced that, the emotional high of what happened.
What happened for Jason McElwain, or JMac as his friends call him, is about more than a shot. Diagnosed with autism at 2 years old, now identified as highly functioning, he's never considered himself different or separate, especially when it comes to sports.
Sports has always been, how could I say, his equalizer. He's just like any of the other kids out there.
It's not really a big deal at all. I'm just normal like other people. It's the way I am.
At 5'6", JMac didn't make the junior varsity basketball team at his high school, Greece Athena, near Rochester, New York. Instead, he became team manager, a role he now has for the varsity as a senior. In the last 3 years, in his white shirt and black tie, he's missed only one game.
Go to practice, I set up the clock and get the water in games and be enthusiastic.
As this season was wrapping up, Coach Johnson approached Jason with an idea about the Trojans' final home game of the season.
I said, I'm really going to look to try to get you in the game, but remember, I can't promise you that. And he goes, okay, Coach.
February 15th, Greece Athena against Spencerport, senior night. With word out that Jason might play, the student section printed signs of JMac's face, just in case. And with 4:19 left in the game, with the Trojans up by 20, Coach called down to the end of the bench for number 52.
I just kind of turned and pointed at him, and he almost ran right on the court. He was so excited.
Hey, Jay, you got to check in. So he hits the buzzer, and he doesn't go anywhere. It's like, now you go on the court. He was so caught up in the moment.
he came into the game, they all stood up and they put the signs, or, you know, the pictures of him up, and I got really emotional. And I sat down and started to cry.
With 3:46 left, Jason got the ball.
When he missed that first three, I was like, oh, and then it airball, and I was like, man, I really just want to see him score one time.
I put my head in my hands like, dear God, please, let's just get him a basket.
Then, with 3:12 left, another chance.
That third trip down the court, magic.
As soon as I started hitting my first shot, I just kept shooting, and I was just hot as a pistol.
Shot after shot after shot kept going in.
The basket was like this big, huge bucket, and I was shooting them like they were free throws. It was just a big, huge bucket that's like huge.
And I was like, oh my God, is this really happening? He has more points than me, so he's got bragging rights over me.
He was unstoppable for that moment in time. He was unstoppable.
He comes down the court right at the end with like 3 seconds left, and he hits this one that's, you know, probably like an NBA three. As soon as the gun ended, they stormed the court, you know. I couldn't, you know, I just couldn't dream anything like that.
It felt like we won a championship. Everyone was just so happy for me.
In that 4 minutes, 19 seconds, Jason was 7 for 13, 6 of 10 from three-point range, 20 points in all. In his first and only varsity basketball game, JMac was the high scorer.
Truly the most incredible moment I've ever had in coaching. I was so touched, and it was just so special to me that a young man, his dream came true, you know, and that I could help that. It was awesome.
What we all want in life is a shot. JMac took his, and now it's a story we can all tell.
Wow, what an amazing story. I've watched that video several times, not nearly as many times as you have, but it still brings up such great like emotions, memories. I can remember all the way back to when that story first came out, and it's still just as touching. And I still find myself as I'm watching, you're expecting, at least I'm expecting, this kid to get in the game, and the whole story is about him scoring one bucket. But the fact that I think it gets lost on me over time that he came in and with almost 3 minutes to go, didn't have any points, and he scores and finishes the game with 20 points. Not only did he get in, he's the leading scorer. Like, what an amazing opportunity and life moment for JMac. But, Coach, I can only imagine as a coach and a mentor what that moment meant to you watching somebody thrive when they're given an opportunity. Can you share some of the emotions that comes up for you now after watching that for your umpteenth, thousandth time, and then what it's meant to you over the years and your relationship with JMac and what it has just ultimately meant for you in your post-coaching career?
Yeah, it's got me choked up again, Sandy. I got to admit, I've seen that numerous times, and I do a lot of speaking where I show it. So, but there were so many lessons that came out of that. The best thing for me is that it made me realize that the importance as a leader on how you can help others. And, you know, it's funny, I got into coaching. I was at that point, I had been a head coach about 20 years, and I was kind of known as the coach that couldn't win the big one. We kept having winning seasons, and then we would lose in our postseason tournament. But that changed after that night. It changed the perspective of what I really believe. I became such a better leader because, my mindset was that, how can I help these kids have their dreams come true, whether it's winning as a team, but, doing some things individually. And the thing that touched my heart so deeply was that I wrote a book about it called A Coaching Miracle that you read. And the interesting part about that season is it never almost didn't happen for me because we had a lot of internal strife and I nearly resigned early in the season. Fortunately, my wife and my staff told me, I was a big quote guy, and I always used to say, "When the going gets tough, the tough get going." And they reminded me that I needed to get going, and so I hung in there. But the first half of the season was really a disaster. It was the toughest first half of my 30 years as a head coach. Yet we just kept plugging away, and the really neat thing to give you that context, because the team had been divided, I knew the kids really liked JMac. He'd been around for 3 years and he was really committed and do anything for any of the kids on there. But what I didn't know was out of their own hearts, Sandy, in those last 4 minutes, they decided to pass the ball to Jason every possession. And although I still kid J-Mac to this day, Jason, I'm still looking for your first assist. You didn't pass the ball once, but it truly was so special. And the crazy thing is that Jason now, after that game, has to go back as our team manager because he had to play in 6 regular season games to qualify to be on the postseason roster. Yet he embraced that, and we ended up winning our first championship later that season. So it was truly incredible. And then Jason actually came back and volunteered to my program as a varsity assistant coach for my last 8 years. And we won 5 more championships together. So he was definitely my good luck charm. But it just really taught me, so many lessons. But the one that jumped out at me is the fact is Jason's perseverance. That fact, Sandy, I was a head coach 30 years. I never had a player try out more than twice if they didn't make the team. Yet he tried out 3 consecutive years. And not only tried out, he would come to all our off-season workouts. We had a lot of expectations for our kids. And, he was so into trying to make the team. And when he didn't make the team, the fact that he would embrace the manager's job to be the best that he could do to help the team be successful. So there was just a lot of lessons I learned from Jason about perseverance and putting the team first and many more.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an amazing story. But I'd love to talk about, kind of rewind the story a little bit, go back to what you were just describing, which is oftentimes like right before the best things in our life happen, we're usually at some part of a low moment.
Yeah.
That low moment, from what I learned over, my years, can serve as the greatest mirror showing us where we're stuck.
Yeah.
And the things that we need to improve, because so often it's so easy to look at a lens of what's wrong out there. Can you talk a little bit more about how it felt to you when you were at that kind of deepest moment? Things aren't going that well. The team is divided. You're responsible for making sure you get the most out of these kids.
Right.
What was the introspection like? I know you mentioned the quote, which is a great one, but what was going on internally, and how were you able to pull not just out of it, but really galvanize a team that was divided and lead them to a championship? What was that process like?
Well, the story that I think really changed, and it wasn't like a panacea where it completely flipped everything, but was we played in a Christmas tournament and we were struggling. We had won our first 2 games, and then that's when the disruption occurred and the team got very divided. And we lost 3 of our next 5 games, and we were really struggling. We were a talented team that was just underachieving because we were so divided. And so we go into this Christmas tournament, and the host school was the biggest school in Rochester, called Fairport, and they were really good that year. And the reason I got in the tournament is because I thought we were very good, but not the way we were playing. In the opening round, we win in a very close game and play poorly again. And the host school in the next game beats this team that we had barely beaten 2 weeks earlier. They beat them by 40 points. Next day, we have a short practice because it's during Christmas break, and it's called a shoot around. And normally at a shoot around, we'll bring our players in and we'll sit, we'll go through some plays and go through some shooting and get ready for the game. But I knew that was not going to be the right formula. So I changed it. And when they walked in, I didn't bring a basketball out. I sat them all in the bleachers, and I shocked them with my first statement. I said, "Guys, I don't want to go to the game tonight." And they looked at me in disbelief. "What do you mean?" I said, well, unless we decide we're going to unite, Fairport's going to beat us by 50 points tonight. But the best thing I did, Sandy, and something I do a lot of leadership talks, is as a leader, you got to be willing to be vulnerable. And I opened up. I said, guys, I know we got to unite this team, but I don't know how to do it right now. But you do. You got to be willing to share. And for the next hour, all we did is I just listened, and the players shared their feelings, their insights. And you could tell it was funny because after we finished that, we'd never brought a basketball out yet. I could see a different bounce in their step. And it did manifest that night. We played a very good game. We lost to Fairport in overtime, which showed that we could do. And that really gave us some momentum. It was a day by day process. You talk about, one of the things I talk about is carpe diem, which Jason sees the day. But the fact is that every day I was going through, all right, how can I improve this team to get them feeling, and I always met with kids one-on-one, but I was doing a lot more one-on-one meetings, and just really checking in. And Jason was kind of the stabilizer because he didn't really understand how divided we were, but his enthusiasm every day, and he had this mantra, Sandy, it was called stay focused. And he would talk at the end of every practice when we get the players together, he'd say, and guys, remember, stay focused. So it was a powerful reminder of, what he stood for day in and day out.
That's so beautiful. So many different things come up for me, but one big thing that I heard you describe was helping people really get in touch with and allow a safe enough space for people to be vulnerable themselves.
Right.
Not only did you lead with the vulnerability, but you're actually encouraging people to share, like, what are you feeling in this moment?
Right.
We're capable of so much more. And I think that's one of those difficult things as a leader that we all face is you think, it's on me. It's my job to show how, much potential we have. It's my job to show that, I can rise above my own feelings. But really at the end of it, it's actually showing everyone it's safe enough to dive into your own feelings, feel a little bit vulnerable, because when everybody's pretending, there's not a lot of soul in that.
Right.
And anyone who's ever won anything big, you've got to go through a lot of adversity.
Yeah.
And you don't do that by pretending. You do that by getting real. And I find, getting real means get in touch with your feelings, which as a man in today's world, we're kind of encouraged, or maybe we believe we're encouraged not to do that.
Right.
But I love the idea that your way through it was to really get present with what's here. There's potential. We're not meeting it. Let's throw the basketball off to the side and let's really get in touch with, what we're feeling. What is the resistance to why we're not working together?
Right.
When you look back on that moment, can you see dynamics that maybe you didn't understand at the time, whether they related to personal individual egos on the team, stress, maybe things going on at home? Like, I'm curious what came up that maybe in looking back felt like really allowed people to come together and move away from this idea of separateness to realizing, like, hey, as a team, we're all one. We're only going to do as well as we can as a collective. But what, if anything, can you share that really came up that you saw just might help trigger the full potential of the group that you were leading?
It's a very challenging question because it was a challenging time. And the fact, the things I learned, one was that I had to really open up and show that I was willing to share that I didn't have all the answers. And one of the things that I teach leaders now that I learned a lot from that year was the fact that I believe the best leaders are looking for the best answers for the team, but it doesn't have to be your answer. And that's a hard thing because as a leader, you have an ego. And it's like you said, I should know the way. And sometimes you don't know the way and you got to be willing. And that's where I believe, with all the years that I coach basketball, because we exploded after that. We ended up winning 6 championships in my last 11 years and made the finals 8 times. And the thing that I saw that I did better is I did a better job of empowering my players and really teaching them to be the leaders. And I changed, like I had a captain's meeting every week, and it used to come in with just all my agenda. And then I changed it. In fact, I kid leaders, I think you should be the CQA. What is that? The chief question asker. So instead of coming in with my agenda, I would come in and just ask them questions like, how's the chemistry in the team? Is there anybody right now that needs extra attention that we can help this week? What is your recommendations? What should we focus on and making us better this week? And just really getting them to take ownership of the team and then spread that through the team. Is something that I think I learned so much from that experience that helped really manifest in a positive way going forward, that the best teams are team led and not necessarily, you as the coach, you're the leader. But when you can develop and create leaders on your team, then you got something really special, because the bottom line is great teams hold each other accountable. And when you don't hold each other accountable because you don't understand the mission, you don't understand the goals, and really clarity. Like one of the things I always talk to leaders about is clarity of communication is kindness. Now, what does that mean? That means that you got to be clear, because sometimes it's praise and sometimes it's correction, and you need to do both as a leader. And the other thing that I learned immensely was that as a leader, you can't avoid the elephant in the room. And that was something the first few weeks after I was really struggling, I didn't want to deal with that elephant. And then it really came to that, meeting, that practice after that first game in the Christmas sermon. It's like, I got to address this elephant because it ain't going away.
No. Pretty tough to hide an elephant.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's the thing for all of us in life. Usually it's the one thing we're avoiding, the conversation, the action we need to take, and we're just avoiding it. And if we would just take it, we'd realize that we're safe. It's okay. And it was just that one thing that needed to happen. But you brought up something that I think we could dive into for the next half hour. And you didn't say it in these words. You said kindness, but I want people to challenge themselves to relate to the word love. It's a made up construct that we have as humans, but it's something we've all felt. And the more I've studied this concept, I think it's beautiful amongst teams. But I think it can be misunderstood. A lot of people will look at love or look at kindness and they think that it's just the good things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just when I say something nice to pick someone up.
Right.
But you touched on something that I firmly believe in, and I'll translate it into love is the truth.
Yes.
The truth is love. When you live in the truth, and that means that it could be something harsh that needs to be said.
Yeah.
It could be some harsh vulnerability that you need to take for yourself. But that's ultimately what I see as love. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm right with you. And it's something, as I evolved as a coach, that love became a more and more important factor. I'm not a Bible expert, but I do know one of the excerpts is that the truth will set you free. And you're so right. In fact, one of the things I talk about, Sandy, and to help leaders, and something I learned is, we always talk about how do you build trust with your team. And one of the things I encourage leaders is to have an intentional trust plan. And I took over 4 programs. My first program was a disaster. We won 1 game and they fired me after 1 season. So it wasn't a good start to my career. But the next 3 programs, we were able to turn around losing programs into winners in a fairly quickly time. And what I learned from that is that I knew I had to build trust. And so I had a 3-point plan. I'd be glad to share those with you if you'd like.
Yeah.
That we would work with our coaching staff and our players to build trust. So our 3 points was, number 1 is that we had to align our words and actions so that, you're going to be consistent. Like, for example, being on time was one of our non-negotiables. And one of the things I encourage leaders, I think you should have a few non-negotiables, but you can't have 100. Okay. It's got to be a couple. One of ours was being on time, because I really felt that was an important thing to teach our players. But if being on time was so important to me, then I had to model that. So that, if we practiced at 6 o'clock in the morning, I had to be one of the first people there. I was never there just at 6 o'clock. It was 5:45, 5:30, whatever it happens to be. Number two is what we just talked about, is we really focused on telling each other the truth. Now, I believe that's an art and a science. And why I say that is because as you build relationships, which is building trust, is you have to find out about each individual's needs. And there were some players I could call out in front of the team. They could handle it well, and it would be very effective to tell the truth in front of the team. There are other players that would handle that very poorly and would hurt them. So that was done often behind closed doors in a one-on-one, but the truth still had to be shared. And then the third one is, because we took over programs that hadn't been winning, and had lower self-esteem, is that this was the old Ken Blanchard, catching people doing right. And we really focused on correcting, but in complimenting with specific praise. Like, I always give an example. Instead of saying "nice job, Johnny," because I coach boys basketball, I would be more specific. I might say, "Johnny, that was awesome how you dove on the floor for that loose ball." That's what championship players do on championship teams. So they really had clarity. Again, clarity of communication is kindness. So they knew why they were praised, because what gets praised often gets repeated. That's what you want as a leader. So those are some of the things that we were really trying to do, is build that trust. And we had an intentional 3-point plan to do that.
Yeah, I love that. Such a great structure that anyone could implement, right? Whether
Yeah.
you're running a small team at a company, running a
Right.
large company, or
Yeah.
coaching, kids.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, comes up for me as I've studied, I'm really big into understanding transformation.
Mhm.
I believe that there's a life that we're all meant to live, but it's usually on the other side of probably our biggest fear. And we're not simply allowing that amazing life to unfold, we're in resistance to it.
Yeah.
And everything that I've studied on the brain, people, our subconscious, like what I have found to be true, and it's certainly not my finding, it's just that I was looking at it, is that as humans, we're pre-programmed to be in a state of fear. Our
Mhm.
mind works to look out for everything that's wrong, right? To keep us alive.
Yeah.
But once we've done that and we've evolved beyond being alive, it stays with us. And if you don't provide the safe environment, hold space for people and let them know it's okay. It's okay to feel a certain way. It's okay for things to not always go right.
Right.
It takes a little bit of that leadership to let people know that, of course, it's fearful, but don't worry, I've got you.
Right.
And I can only imagine, looking back now on even my own high school career, a coach's probably biggest obstacle is helping to manage that fear that's inside of all these young boys, young men, and just say, guys, it's okay.
Right.
Let's just put the aside and let's come together. What stories come to your mind when you think about observing people, just knowing that all people are operating from a place of fear? It's
What-
generally why we're doing what we're doing. If
Right.
you don't manage it, it can kind of take over and run your life. How do you stay on the positive side of that and say, it's okay to have a little bit of fear, but don't let it run your life. Let it propel you forward towards what you know is waiting for you, and then allow that to happen.
Right. Well, this is something that I really started to study, was the mental piece, because as a leader, and especially when you're a basketball coach or any athletic, you always think of the physical. And we certainly, we spend a lot of time working our kids out and getting them ready to play the game physically. But what really changed us is when we started working a lot with their mental training. Like we would give them ideas, like if you say something negative to yourself, we taught them, you say, cancel, John, I'm better than that. So just little simple things like that. Another thing we did is we did mental imagery before every single game. And I'll share a couple quick stories on that. One, my last year in coaching, we had a very good player that ended up playing a couple years in the NBA. But Sandy, he gets fouled at the end of our semifinal game on a three-pointer with 6 seconds to go, down 3. Pretty tough situation, right? He's got to make all 3 or we're pretty much going to lose the game. And he was a good free throw shooter, but not great. He was like 71%. And he makes all 3, and we win in overtime. And I'll never forget the reporter afterwards asked him, and I was in earshot away in the locker room. He said, Anthony, what were you thinking? He said, I had done so many mental imagery sessions. I knew those balls were going in. And sure enough, they did. And the other little sidelight, the power of mental imagery and just working on the mental piece is that when I retired, my assistant coach took over for me, and he asked me to ask the players about some things. And one of them was, should we keep mental imagery? And that year I had 14 players on the team, and every single player said, Coach, we definitely should keep mental imagery. So that's how much they bought into the mental piece of the game. So I think as a leader, as you're building, what we talked about briefly about relationships, is getting to know them on and off the court, in my case, on and off the business, wherever it is, and getting to know them by asking questions and really also being aware of people have feelings. They have mental challenges as well as physical challenges. And we've really got to be, as something I really started to become a student. I believe a leader, like I talk about different things about leadership, and I say, is that you got to have competence. So you got to study. In my case, I studied the game of basketball because I was teaching it, but I also studied leadership because if I was going to be a great coach, then I had to become a better leader. It wasn't just, understanding the X's and O's and how to run plays. Yes, it's part of it, but it's understanding what's in between each of those guys' heads and how can I help them get the best out of that. And, because we always talk about building confidence. Well, building confidence comes from repetition, seeing it. And that's why mental imagery was positive, because we were seeing, it done the right way and how to correct when you do it the wrong way. And also reinforcing, the fact that when our players did things well, that we're specifically praised so that they understood what it took to be highly successful.
Yeah, I love that. Back to this whole idea of transforming, which I would say is really just kind of realizing your full potential, going from a state where there's nothing wrong with you, but that there's more available, and how do you transform into that? Right. Probably the most powerful lesson that I've learned is whether you're looking for peace in your life, whether you're looking to win some trophy, whether you're just looking to take every step joyfully in life, the most powerful thing that I've learned is you become the energy of that before the end result actually manifests. So there's a big trap that everyone in life can fall into where we're chasing results or we're chasing symptoms, and we want more money. We want happiness. We want an amazing partner. We want better relationships, kids, coworkers, friends, our community. But there's a dangerous trap when you try to jump over the becoming part and chase the result.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of times, like I watched the Jimmy Valvano episode when he won the championship. In fact, Derek Wittenberg was one of my coaches.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Him and Tom Abetamarco were both part of that team. So I know that story really well.
Yeah.
But there's such a beautiful stories that are told by those guys about Jimmy Valvano saying, hey, we're going to have a practice session where we cut down the nets.
Right.
I want you to feel what it's like to be a champion well ahead of cutting down the actual nets.
Right.
What can you share about helping people become a champion, helping people become that person on the free throw line who makes all three. Certainly visualization is a key part of it, the imagery, but
Yep.
also just the belief, the knowing, and putting in the hard work. I think even Muhammad Ali said, I won every fight out on a dirt road long before I ever got into the ring.
Right.
What comes up for you when you're thinking about getting people prepared for the moment and becoming a champion well before the championship trophy's ever passed out?
Well, I have a few thoughts on that. So, from the physical, is one of the things we always talked about is sweat equity, and the willingness to work in the unseen hours. Where people don't know, and really talked about. Like I used to kid our players, when you're not practicing, someone somewhere is, and when you meet, you're going to lose. So, really trying to encourage them that work ethic is important. You got to be willing to put in the reps so that will build the confidence. In our case, trying to build the skills for basketball, both the basketball skills and also you're getting your body in the best shape it can be. So the physical piece. And then the second piece is the mental piece, which we talked some about. And the huge thing I believe as a leader is that you got to help them understand them. I talk to leaders now, and I didn't talk as much with my players, but I would always ask them, do you know what your most important values are? And are you standing up for those values? So, like we had core values for our team. One of them was respect. So as respect, I would go through what does it look like to respect each other and, model that. So as a leader, it's really important that you model those things. And then I would talk to them about, my personal mission statement, which was to be an outstanding role model that makes a positive difference in the world by helping others make their dreams come true. And so I knew what I stood for. And I'm not perfect. I made mistakes every day, believe me. But at the other side of it is, though, that's what I was trying to live each day, is that I had these core values that I was trying to live and teach our players and really get them to understand of who they are. And, why were you put on this earth? That's a great question to keep asking yourself. So I was trying to teach them both as an individual, who they are, and then the big part then is, in basketball, it's a team sport. So how do you get each other to care and work for each other and put the team ahead of you? Because we could talk about that. We always talked about having we over me guys, and that's something we really looked at when we were evaluating the guys who wanted on our team. But we all have egos. And so that's something that we were talking about each day. And one of the things that I encourage leaders is you got to be the chief storyteller, and that you got to find stories of both illustrations of examples that you wanted them to follow and also warnings. So I obviously we're in the basketball world. So I might bring up a story of a pro basketball player or a college. And, I won't pick on anybody positive or negative, but I'll just say, how come Joe Smith, all the teams he plays on, they always win? And then we talk about, what are the characteristics? Because, he had, good numbers, but, you could tell that he cared about his teammates. He led by example. And then you pick out another player and you'd say, hey, how come John Jones, he has the same numbers as Joe Smith, but his teams always lose? And then we talk about, what are some of the negative things that he's creating that are hurting his team. So I think those are things you really, so it's helping the individual understand who they are and then putting it together in a connected way of, now we're going to do something collectively together. And that's where the mission of the program, the vision, where we're going. And then it's the daily disciplines after that. You hear that all the time, that famous 1% rule, but how can we get 1% better? That's a question we asked our players all the time, and during practice, and then, it is part measurement. We measured a lot of things so that they knew results. But we also talked to them about the things you can't measure, like loving each other. You brought that up, and it's so important, and caring. Like one of the things we did is a little team activity before we started our postseason tournament, where we called it a team wraparound, and each player would have an opportunity to share why they cared so much, so deeply for the person across from them. So it's all that pieces together of helping them individually and helping them unite as a team.
Yeah. You brought up a word that I think is worth exploring a little bit. And you said, I'm not perfect, I'm human.
Mm-hmm.
And as humans, I feel like we're the only species that runs around trying to pretend we're not who we are.
Yeah,
Everyone's trying to run around and prove I'm not human.
right.
But I've gotten a lot into, psychoanalysis, and there's a line that cuts through all of our hearts where we're all capable of really terrible things as a human, and we're all capable of incredible things. And it's not until you really embrace the fact that we all have dark shadows inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's but for our conditioning and how we were raised and just being fortunate to be in the situation that we were in that causes us to look at and relate to certain circumstances differently. But we're no better than someone who didn't have that same opportunity. In fact, in every one of our lives, our histories, I bet we could all find things that could have made us either go very negative or very positive. And it's embracing the fact that we are truly human. We're no more above taking a wrong turn than we are taking the right turn. It's really embracing that. And I think that's where something like gratitude comes in
Mm-hmm.
and says, we really need to be thankful for everything that's happened, because everything is only because everything is.
Mm-hmm.
Not just pick and choose, the good moments. In fact, I think you would say, if it wasn't for that dark moment at the beginning of that season, you never would have transcended and, gone past that. But
Right.
that idea of, again, just making it okay to be human
Mm-hmm.
is something I think is easy for us to lose ourselves. And one of the things that I've really found to be the case is that introduces something called judgment,
Mm-hmm.
where we're judging our own situation or we're judging other people. And then when you look into that deep enough, you realize what we're judging in other people is really mirroring back something we don't like about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well
So
said.
that process of just dissolving the idea that there's anything wrong with us, anything wrong with anybody else, it seems like that's the gateway to becoming one as a team and really surging forward. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but just as you said the word, I am human, it brought that up for me. I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to dive into further there, but I just wanted to expand on that a little bit for everybody watching.
Well, the one thing I did learn, going back to a little bit about mental, and we taught our players on, goal setting, and we always talked about the power of I am. So one of the things we taught our players is, I want you to say in front of a mirror every day, I am responsible and I like myself. So those are the two things we wanted them. And then we would talk to them about how they could write their goals out and then, say those in front of the mirror with I am. So you're taking responsibility because, to be an effective leader or be a good teammate, the first person you got to lead is yourself. And we often forget that. And then once you become a better leader yourself, then I think it's important that we start to really show that we can spread love, spread kindness. And that as a leader, you got to remember, I always used to tell our players, and it started with me, and I'll tell you a quick little story about it in a second, is that as a leader, you're always on stage. And whether you believe it or not, your team is watching you all the time. And my quick story. So one of the things I asked our players to do, and an expectation is when we go to a travel to another school, that we wear a shirt and tie. We want to be classy. Well, one time, Sandy, I did not wear a shirt and tie. And, I still dress nice, but I'll never forget when we got back to the school, one of my parents challenged me. He said, Coach, you always talk about you want to be a great role model for our sons, and yet you insist they have a shirt and tie and you don't wear one. And you know what? It took me a step back, and then I realized, you know what? He was absolutely right. I needed to hear that. And I will admit I made my change. And that's something is when you learn, are you willing to implement it? I will say that I never didn't wear a shirt and tie. It's for any road game after that, because it made me realize, hey, everybody's watching me. I'm the leader. And that's something you're trying to teach your team members about, how you behave on and off the court in our case, or, are you the same positive, good person, in the business world that you are at home? And because we're a whole person, and that's something we were trying to teach our guys is to live a successful life means that you've got to be able to be a good person, when you're with your team, but a good person at home, out in the community. Because, like, for example, our team mission was to develop winners on and off the court. And me as the leader, I really worked very hard to define, what does it take to be a winner off the court? Are you a positive community member? Are you someone that does their best academically? So those are the things we were trying to teach, besides winning the game. We wanted to win the game, but there was so much more that we were trying to teach our players to help them be successful in the biggest game, which is the game of life, right?
That's right. Yeah, I love that. I also love the idea too that, humility is something I think a lot of leaders need to have. And I think we're all leaders. It doesn't matter if you have a team, if you don't, like, someone is looking up to you.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, you are the leader of your own life.
Yeah.
And so these principles, I think, really cascade across everybody who would be tuning in. What can you do to lead a better life for yourself and help others really enjoy the person they get to be when they're around you,
Right.
so that they can kind of follow that? But I think that humility, one of my mentors, David Meltzer, would tell me, you're either humble or you're about to be. And the moment you think and embrace this separateness, that maybe I'm a little better than I think, something's going to humble you. And I think you can always tell a really good leader who is not only willing to hear tough criticism, embrace it and find the truth in it and do something, about it, but also not be so hard on themselves. Again, back to being human, where you're not judging yourself. I think a lot of times we can take the leadership, I need to be the right role model, a little too far,
Mhm.
and not have that same humility that says, you know what, guys, I did screw up and I'm sorry. I too am human, but I promise, I too will do better. So it's kind of interesting. It's not this game of perfection,
Right.
doing it perfect, but having the awareness and the sense of presence and the humility to say, I'm not going to always do it, and I appreciate you holding me, to the line the way I would hold you. And that goes back, I think, to love, which we
Yeah.
talked about.
Right.
So I'm curious to know from you, there's obviously a lot of on-court success stories that you're thousands of kids that you've coached and led. What comes up for you when you think of people who went through your program that you see out in the community just doing things that make you proud, just to be able, honored to watch them be who they are as leaders out in the community, at work, but away from the court?
But my proud moments is when I see when our players leave high school, that they go on and find something that they're very successful in. Whether it's going to college, some of them did, some of them don't. Like we just had a thing that Jason and I were recognized for our 20-year anniversary of the game. And one of the players that was on the court with Jason actually was a neighbor of mine, and he really struggled. He didn't play his senior year because he got involved with some drugs and alcohol. But it was really cool to see. His name is Mike, and I said, Mike, I see your commercials on TV. He runs a roofing business and he has like 100 employees. The guy has done amazingly well. And, he struggled for a while. But he said, Coach, some of the lessons that you always talked about, I started to really think about, and I've put them into my business, and now the thing has exploded. So it's really cool. And, just like, Jason's magical night. Well, my last year, I mentioned that Anthony, Anthony ended up being a good college player, but not in my wildest dreams did I ever think I'd have a player playing the NBA. And I actually got to see Anthony play for the Houston Rockets. And it was unbelievable to think of, that I actually coached a kid that played in the NBA. It was really, and I think Jason's story really inspired Anthony. He's like, you know what? If Jason could do that, hey, why not me? I can do something special. So, but there's like just a lot of when I meet a former player, like one of my former players reached out and said, "Hey, Coach, let's meet at the game tonight." And he's doing really well. He's successful in his business now, and so. Really the neat thing, I heard this many years ago. I think it was an old football coach. He said, I won't know how successful I was with my players until 20 years from now and see how they come out as people. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty powerful thing. And that's something that, now that I've been retired for a while, getting to see a number of my players that have been really quite successful in life.
Yeah. Well, and that's really what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
We have these flash moments of high school or these individual things, but it's really what can you carry forward from those lessons and start to stack in your life as you build a greater and greater, life moving forward of more meaning, more purpose, one more of service. That's really powerful stuff. So what would you say? I think to some degree, we're all always struggling or in relationship with some circumstance, some person in our lives, where we may fall into kind of a victim's energy from time to time and feel like the world's happening to us. I've found a lot of great tools to help people kind of evolve out of that more into your ego and then ultimately to your soul. When you get there, you realize everything that's happening is actually happening for you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to find the lessons in it. But what advice would you give to anybody watching, whether they're just, they're leading their personal life, they're facing some kind of challenge, things may feel like they're not going the way they're supposed to be going, and they want to start turning that around. What advice do you have for people in sort of finding their way out of what might feel like their deepest hole is?
So a couple thoughts. One is I believe you have to remain curious. And so when you're striving to learn all the time, by asking questions and, feeding your mind with good material, whether it's reading or listening to great podcasts like Sandy's podcast, and picking up really good ideas. I really encourage people to start an idea journal. So you write down ideas that you think are good. And then the second part of putting them down is then to implement ones that you think can work for you. And then the second thing is I believe you got to really be aware of the people that you're spending the most time with. I used to ask my players all the time, are your friends helping or hindering where you want to go in life? And if they're hindering, you better start to think about finding some new friends that are going to help you and not hinder you. Because, surrounding yourself with the right people and getting good mentors and like I've had some good mentors, but a lot of my mentors are just people like the late Jim Rohn, the late John Wooden, that I would listen to all their audio programs and read their books, and you can learn so much. There's so much information out there. But but surrounding yourself with the right people, and it's simple, yet we don't do it. It's like, you know what? If you want to be great in something, like I wanted to be a great basketball coach, so I studied John Wooden. Why? Because he was probably the greatest coach of all time. So
Yeah.
what he's doing, I want to learn what he's doing, and I'm not John Wooden. I can't do what John Wooden, but I can learn from what he did and then implement it to works best for me. And I think that's a really, going back to that word curious, is what are the best doing? I'll give you a quick story. So when I took over the second program I took over, it was a small school. And the first coaches meeting we went to, there was one guy, he was winning the league every year. And the rest of the coaches hated him because all he did was win. And you know what? I was like, this guy knows what he's doing. I became good friends with the guy, and I used to, ask him a lot of questions, and he helped me immensely. We used to go to clinics together. So instead of being jealous of this guy, I befriended the guy because he knew what he was doing. I want to learn from the best. So I think that's something, going back to you mentioned about an ego, is that you got to throw your ego out in the sense that, it's okay to have an ego and be positive about yourself and confident in what you're doing, but always be willing to keep growing. And you keep growing by learning, the famous adage, but I think there's a lot of truth that if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. So.
Yeah, for sure. I guess I've been lucky in that regard. I never had to worry about that too much. Yeah, that I want to build on that just a little bit as we look to kind of wrap things up. And one of the things, actually, Jordan Peterson talks about this, the idea that sometimes we aim too high, that we might feel low and we want to somehow bounce all the way to the top and do something big, do it extraordinary. But he talks a lot about just aim lower. Aim for something you can achieve by the end of the day.
Yeah.
Whatever that little thing is. There's a whole book about just making your bed.
Yeah.
Just start building the little tiniest habits, but as you stack those things as it relates to your health, relationships, over a 3-year period of time, you will accomplish more than you ever could imagine by stacking small, little, attainable habits than trying to master one giant one. And this, I'm always blown away. I was with my son. We were sitting right behind the Knicks bench earlier this year, Madison Square Garden. The NBA coaches are still talking during a timeout about the tiniest things, closeouts,
Yeah.
your feet, moving the ball. Let's make good bounce passes. It's all fundamentals. It's all doing the little things.
Right.
What advice do you have for people, again, looking to make a small incremental step and just get a little bit better, but not bypassing the fundamentals of life, trying to chase some bigger goal and a bigger outcome?
Well, a guy that I befriended, we're not best of friends, but he's now become a big speaker. But he was a basketball trainer. His name was Alan Stein Jr. And Alan had the opportunity to work Kobe Bryant's camp. And Kobe was legendary for working out at 4 a.m. And so Alan wanted to see what his workout was, and he was shocked. He said he watched Kobe, and all he was doing is these real basic fundamental. And at that point, Kobe was probably the best player in the NBA. And so he was intrigued, and he asked him after the workout, Kobe, I was expecting so many different things, and all you do was work on some real basics. And he says, Alan, the reason I'm the best in the world is because I never get bored with the basics. I'm always go back, and I got to keep getting better at the basics. And I think that's something, it's easier said than done, but I think that the best people understand that you got to be really good in the basics. And that, going back to the other thing that I think is hugely important is the compound effect. And I used to always tell our players, is your habits on a daily basis, are they helping or hindering your progress? Because they're going to compound. So if you're going out and you're drinking on the weekend, obviously they shouldn't be because they're in high school. But let's face the facts. Some of them are. You know what? That's hindering your progress because the best are not doing that. And so, that was important to me to be a model for that. Like in fact, with my last 20 years, I decided not to drink during the season. Now I don't drink at all. But it was just I wanted to show the importance of modeling what I was expecting out of young people, although I, legally could drink. But going back is each day, how can you get a little bit better at the fundamentals? And because the compounding effect is you don't gain 60 pounds in 2 days, by eating, a couple bad meals. You gain 60 pounds because on a day to day basis, you're eating bad food and you're not exercising, and the same thing. So taking care of your mind. And so one of the things that I share with people is start to establish some daily non-negotiables. And I think it starts with one. And the one for me was exercise. No matter how busy I get, I always at least exercise something. Whether it's a walk or I'm big into tennis, but doing something to start that and magnifies. And now I have a few other non-negotiables. Like I have a daily prayer ritual. I have a daily meditation ritual, and those are things I started to add. But the keystone habit is, as I've learned, was my exercise. That kind of really pushed me, and then start thinking about how can I add, every 3 months, maybe another discipline, whether it's like when I started meditating about 7 or 8 years ago, I couldn't sit still. Yeah, it was crazy. So I started with 90 seconds. And now I do it for 20 minutes pretty much every single day. But that's what it was. Start small, and start to build that habit, and then incrementally start to add to that a little bit. But it's huge compounding. I want to get a huge tangent about say, like, so many people in our country are financially struggling. And you know what? And they know what to do. I got to save some money. I got to invest some money. And it's funny, it hit me in my 30s when I listened to this Jim Rohn tape, and he said, his mentor said to him, if you want to be wealthy, study wealth. And I'm thinking, wow, I don't study wealth. That's why I'm not wealthy. And so I started to put in some of these practices. It's amazing. I started to become much more financially independent. Same with my fitness. Like I'm proud that I'm in my 60s. And if I see a former player, I'm not 20 pounds overweight because I take care of myself. But those are things, that are important to me. But it starts with understanding the basics, and then start with one, and then start to add a few, and come up with what I call those daily non-negotiables.
Yeah, I love it. I feel like we could now go and dive into everything you just said and have a whole nother hour. We'll have to look to bring you back as we close out the show. It was amazing. Thank you for those insights. I think the idea of, living from a place of love being the truth, not just being nice,
Right.
and starting with those compounding habits of realizing you're no better than anybody else. We're all in this together. We're all humans. Being a tad bit vulnerable, but still with the professional will to still want to do your best, and start stacking small individual habits, and then allow your amazing life to unfold. Jim, this has been an amazing hour. I really appreciate you not only spending the time with us, but sharing your insights, sharing this beautiful story about yourself and JMac and the other people that you've coached and led. So it's been a privilege to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. And I'll just say last thing, Sandy, is that, you know what? Each day, let's go out and spread love and kindness with each other. Let's help the world be a better place, because you can do that with simple acts of kindness every single day.
Absolutely. Speaking of acts of kindness, Jason, can you throw up the link for Coach's book, A Coach and a Miracle? You can find it at coachjimjohnson.com. You'll find a link to purchase the book. It proves to be an amazing journey through what was a really transformative year for him, for JMac, and that whole town, really. So, Jim, thank you again for your time. Thanks for joining us, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. Have an amazing week, and just know that your best life exists on the other side of your greatest fear. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks for watching an Expansive Life Conversation. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you next week.